So we've been having a lot of conversations with a whole bunch of people that are wanting to do the same thing as we've done, which is leave Australia, travel full time as a family, and maybe settle down somewhere else like we have in Penang. But there's a lot of things that aren't in the brochure that I want to cover off today. And so for those who don't know who I am, my name is Jimmy, and I am one quarter of the Mitches on the Horizon family. And we've been traveling full time through Southeast Asia for 2 years. And more recently, we've settled here in Penang. This is our home for the foreseeable future. Now, before I go through the things I've got here on my list, I want to qualify something. This is just one family's opinion of traveling. Yours may be completely different. Everyone has different experiences, and you could put 20 people in a room and everyone will have a different experience traveling like this. But I'm just going to share ours. Like I've said in the past, we're just an everyday normal family, but our experience should be a reasonably good representation of what you should expect. So the first thing I want to touch on is I didn't expect how much of a test it would be on relationships. That's not only my relationship with my wife, but it's also my relationship with my kids, my wife's relationship with my kids, and of course, my wife's relationship with me. The thing is, when you're traveling full time and you're traveling in unknown environments on an adventure, you're in each other's pockets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's no way around that, because the thing is, you're in an unfamiliar environment, you've got each other and that's it. And that can be a real test of relationships. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting how difficult it can be at times. You don't realize when you're back at home, you got kids going to school, you're going to work, your wife is maybe working as well, but you have breaks from each other and you have other circles of friends and networks and things like that where you can get a bit of a break from each other. That doesn't happen when you travel. And trust me, if you come into traveling and you have some issues that you haven't resolved before you left, it's just going to amplify them. Traveling is a massive amplification tool. So if your husband or your wife or your kids have little quirks that really get to you, try and get them sorted out before you leave, because it can become a massive issue when you're traveling and you just got each other and you're already on a wit's end due to the stress of traveling, and all of a sudden your significant other does something that really irks you and it turns into a massive thing when really it's something that could have been sorted. When really it's turning a mountain into a molehill, but when you add the extra stress of traveling, it can go from 0 to 100 really quickly. And I'm not going to sit here and say that we are immune to that. We have just as many quips as any other family. What I will say though is that my wife and I never really argued much when we were in Australia, so we haven't really argued too much while we've been away. But traveling has caused us to have more heated conversations, just because when you're under the stress of traveling, you're under the stress of booking things, things go wrong all the time. It exposes those little chinks in the armor. And that's my best bit of advice for anyone, is that if you have some unresolved issue with your partner, or if there's issues you have with your kids, that you really should be trying to address those before you go and add the extra element of stress of traveling on top. Now, I will say this. I think if a lot of the stress that you feel is caused by where you live, then traveling will actually help a lot with that. So if you're stressed out because you don't have any money, or you're stressed out because of your job and things like that, and that's what's causing the stress, then traveling can actually be a really good solution for that, because you remove that stimulus and it allows you to, if you are a family person or you do love spending time with your loved ones, it's a really good opportunity to focus on that and less on the external stimulus that was stressing you out in the first place. Now, before I continue, if you haven't yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I make a video once a week talking about what it's like to travel full time as a family and our move from Australia to Southeast Asia as a family. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet. So the next thing that caught us really off guard when we started traveling is that the speed you travel at really makes a difference. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, there's two ways of traveling. You have fast traveling and slow traveling. And then you have the third, which is what we're doing now, which is living somewhere else. But for 2 years, we did a combination of fast traveling and slow traveling. Fast traveling is effectively where you're moving more than once a month between places. And I would consider slow traveling anything that's longer than a month. And the ratio of fast traveling you do versus slow traveling to do can really affect your experience when it comes to traveling. For me personally, I can only handle small doses of fast traveling. If we're moving once a week or once every couple of weeks, it really starts to wear me down. And that's when I really start to go, do I really want to be traveling like this? Whereas slow traveling and staying in one spot is really my cup of tea. But my wife, she's not the biggest fan of fast traveling either, but she's way more tolerant of it. But she gets quite itchy feet if we stay in one spot for too long. So it can really affect your experience if you don't have that conversation beforehand and go, what do I prefer? Am I a homebody? Do I like to stay at home and just relax and chill? Or do I like to have adventures and see new things and go new places and explore and things like that? You really should have those conversations beforehand and be prepared when you start traveling to maybe slow down if you're getting overwhelmed with the fact that you have to pack up every 2 weeks, or maybe speed up if you're getting to the point where you're getting itchy feet after 2 weeks of being in one spot, you're ready to move on to the next location. I think it's also worth mentioning that depending on who you're traveling with, you need to take that into account that you will most likely have different cadences when it comes to traveling. So with us, what we like to do when we travel is we'll basically slow travel for 3 or 4 months, and then we'll fast travel for a month. And then we'll slow travel for 3 or 4 months, and then we'll fast travel for a month. I find if it's any more than a month where we're moving every week or every 2 weeks, it just takes too much out of us as a family. Now, if you're a couple or you're a single traveler, that may be different. You may be able to fast travel everywhere you go. But when you got kids and you've got commitments and you have to work still, it can get pretty hard moving every 2 weeks and packing everything up and getting to a new location and all the added stress that comes with that. And so the next thing I have here, which we didn't expect when we signed up to start traveling full-time and sold everything we owned, is that it's actually really hard work to travel full-time. It's obviously outweighed by seeing amazing things and being in amazing places like this and that kind of stuff, but it is actually really difficult because there's so much organizing involved. And I would say that's the single hardest thing about traveling as a family, especially, but even as a couple traveling for an extended period of time, is that everywhere you go, you need to be organized before you get there. And that takes it out of a lot of people. And that's why I'm really lucky to have my wife, because she actually likes organizing things. So I think if it was left up to me to organize everything, I don't think we'd be traveling still. I think I would have just given up on it because logistically, there's so much to organize it. You think about it. If you're just going from, say, Penang here to Kuala Lumpur, same country, you just got to organize the transport to get there. You got to organize where you're going to stay. You got to organize food every night. You've got to organize logistics of how you're going to get from, say, the airport as a transfer. You got to check if the place you're staying has internet. And then you have all the added stress of rocking up to a place and not being exactly what you want. So sometimes you have to organize other accommodation. Sometimes you have events on. It's just extra organizing that needs to happen that generally when you're at home, you don't have to do because you have your routine. It's all set in stone. You don't have to think about it too much when you just go from home to work, to home to eat, to home to dropping the kids off at sport. You don't really have to think about it because you're doing the same thing every single time. But when you're traveling and you're exploring and you're moving around, every time you move, it's like you're starting from scratch again. And talking about what I just spoke about previously, that's what I think causes a lot of the stress with the fast travel too, is every time you move every 2 weeks, you're having to organize everything from scratch. And that is not everyone's cup of tea. And I can assure you, if you got a whole bunch of travelers in a room and you ask them the one worst thing about traveling, that's what they're going to say it is organizing and having to start again. You don't know the accommodation. You don't know if the bed's going to be long enough. You don't have any idea about that. So you need to make sure that at least one of you, if you're traveling as a family or yourself, ready for the organized workload that's required to travel full time. Now, the next thing I want to talk about and what I didn't expect is I knew it was going to be cheap to live in Southeast Asia. We already knew that. We'd seen videos, we got some pricing, but I didn't realize how much of a reliance we'd still need on having an online income or having an income stream that's paying us. We've met a lot of people traveling now. You know, we probably catch up with like different groups, world schooling groups and things like that once a week. And it's always a combination of one of three things. There's either people there that are working online and making a stable income. There's people there that have sold all their assets and are living off savings. And then there's a third lot that have some kind of passive income stream, whether it's rental income or what have you. What I've found is that the people that are relying on savings to do this are generally way more stressed out about the moving around and the doing of the things than the people that have an income stream. And it makes sense, right? So even though everything is cheaper in Southeast Asia, you still have to pay for things. And I found that having a stable online income has helped a lot with just removing that layer of stress, because one of the biggest stress inducers for anyone, doesn't matter if you're traveling or not, is having to worry about finances. So having an online income stream, even if it's not massive, just helps to pad that out a little bit more because, if you're living off savings, that's perpetually depleting and you start to get a little bit of anxiety about it. So I've spoken to a lot of people now who are traveling, and that's the one big thing they say they wish they knew, is that they thought they had enough savings, and they technically do, but there's a lot of anxiety created when you're just living off it and there's no way of topping it up, even if it's a small amount. So obviously we have our online income stream. We've been very honest and transparent about that. I run a digital marketing agency called My Online Guy. You can learn more about that in the card up here if you're curious to know how we go and make money so we can afford to do this. But I think it's just having an income stream. It doesn't matter if it's big, small, or whatever. It just helps psychologically to know that the money you're taking out is being topped up in some way, because a lot of families and a lot of people that travel, they just work out that as they go. They see opportunities as they're traveling. They meet people who are doing things and they work it out. We've got some really good friends who sold everything they owned from the UK and now traveling full time. And they just worked it out as they went. They grew a really big social media presence and now they live off endorsement deals and their YouTube channel. Now, did they go in knowing that's what they were going to do? Well, they were hoping that was what's going to happen, but they just worked really hard because they had a plan of attack to make it happen. So I don't know if it would stop me from traveling, but I would just be conscious that as much as you have $100,000 saved up or $70 or $60 or $50,000 saved up, when you're spending $2,000 a month of that and you're starting to see the end in sight of that money, it can get quite stressful and you need to make sure that you've got some plan B in place. And I talk about that a lot. You've got to make sure you have some plan B in place and work towards that while you're traveling. Okay, so the next thing we didn't account for when we started traveling is adjusting to foreign cultures and routines. You think one of the biggest perks about traveling through, say, Southeast Asia or anywhere that's not your home is you get to experience different cultures, and it's really sold as this awesome thing. You get to experience different cultures, the kids do, just an amazing experience. But that's a double-edged sword. Yes, it's awesome experiencing different cultures and seeing how other people live, but it's also a bit of a shock to you if you've lived in one spot all your life and experiencing something else that you're not familiar with. Like, we just met a family who is leaving Penang, and the reason they said they're leaving is because there's so much garbage around. Now, it's quite confronting for someone that comes from, say, Sweden or Finland or a really clean country to come to a place like Penang and see rubbish on the ground. It's confronting. And you don't realize how much stress and anxiety that creates. Even just traffic. If you come from a small country town in rural Australia and you come to Seoul in South Korea and there's a kilometre of traffic in front of you and you're stuck in traffic in a grab that the guy's maybe smoked in the car and the car smells like smoke, where that's a culturally acceptable norm, it can create a huge amount of anxiety. Little things like in Malaysia, there's mosques everywhere. And these mosques at about 5 o'clock in the morning start doing their call to prayers, which is over a big loudspeaker. And it's very annoying. I know there's going to be Muslims watching this. As a non-Muslim, it's very annoying. I understand why it does it. It's part of the culture and it's interesting to experience. But that's something you have to adjust to because it's not something you're used to if you come from a country like Australia. So adjusting to the cultural norms is a double-edged sword. It's beautiful to experience that. It's beautiful to be able to show the kids and explain to them what's happening there and, be able to see these beautiful mosques and temples and things. But the flip side of that is when the mosque is calling out at 5 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to sleep after a big night of traveling or something like that, that's where the double-edged sword comes in. So the next thing that really hit us hard is being away from our family and friends. As much as I'm not that attached to Australia, my wife is, and she loves Australia. I mean, I love Australia too, but she has a lot of friends. She has a big family circle. And when you travel, you don't see your family and friends as often. Of course, you see them online, you do video calls and stuff with them, but it's not the same. If you're having a bad day because you've had a bad sleep because of the mosque and your partner's getting on your nerves and there's no way of escaping them, and then you're worried about money because you don't have an online income stream, and then all of a sudden you see that one of your friends has got engaged and you're like, oh, I really wish I could be there. That's something you don't expect. A lot of people leave their home country for whatever reason, whether it's they want to experience other cultures or, cost of living or whatever. But you don't realize how much you miss home until you leave it, if that makes sense. So, we've gotten used to it over the years now. We just try and over-communicate with our family. And it's part of the reason I'm recording out here today is because Pauline's parents are here right now as I'm recording this. So people do come and visit and things, but you just have to be mentally prepared that you're going to have bad days, and you're going to have days when you miss your family and your friends, and you got to have things in place so that it doesn't become too much for you. You need to have a way to communicate with your family and friends that they know about. So if you call someone on WhatsApp, they're going to pick up and know that you need to chat to them and things like that. And, you know, it is supplemented somewhat and it is counteracted somewhat by the people you meet when you travel, but it's not the same as your own family at home and being comfortable at home, because you got all the added stress of traveling as well. What I will say is that the people you meet when you're traveling are really awesome people to speak to about this, because they're going through exactly the same thing and they're missing their family and friends as well. So you're in the same boat, and generally you're doing it for the same reason. So that's a nice counter to that. But there are still days where Pauline misses her family and friends, the kids miss their friends from school, things like that. And you just have to have things in place to make sure that when those days happen, you have some way of connecting back to home and really like filling that void as best you can while you're on the road. All right, so this is one thing I personally had to adjust to a lot, and that is being comfortable with less. So I talk about how one of the biggest perks of traveling is that you learn to live with less, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing, especially for the kids and myself. But there is a flip side to that, and that is when you are 6'2" and you're sleeping on a bed that's your ankles are hanging off and you don't have your own pillow and you're sleeping on a kid's pillow and you're having a bad night's sleep, you start to go, actually, I do kind of miss my own bed and my own pillow. So you got to get comfortable with living with less and not being able to have the creature comforts, if that makes sense. So, you know, it took me personally a while to adjust to that. I liked my own bed and I liked my own pillows and I liked my desk and my office at home. When we started traveling, I just had to learn to live without that stuff. And I've gotten used to it now. I can basically sleep on any bed now, but for the first like 3 or 4 months of traveling, it really was affecting me a lot, not being comfortable when I slept. You know, I didn't realize how much of a princess I'd gotten when it came to beds. You know, our beds are super nice one at home, and then to come here and I'm sleeping on just the spring part of a bed, and the pillow's really flat, and the blanket doesn't cover both of us because it's like a double blanket on a queen bed. And that stuff would really get to me and make me really, really angry. And it's made me start missing my own bed and home and things. And then over time, I just adjusted to being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Just making do. Like, you know, we went and bought a little extra roll-up pillow and I put that down. You know, if my feet hang off the edge of the bed, I go and put socks on now. I just adapt and overcome. And same with my wife and my kids. I can't speak on her behalf, but it looks like she's adapting to it well. That's how it is here. And it's hard at the start, but you do get used to it. But it's something you need to get ready for, because one thing I learned is that it's no use complaining about it. If the bed's not long enough, it's not magically going to get longer for you. If the pillow's not tall enough for you, well, it's not going to magically get bigger. So it's like, there's no use complaining about it. You just roll with it, because all the positives of being in another country and experiencing it far outweigh being a little bit more uncomfortable and having to deal with less. And the biggest thing, guys, the biggest thing we didn't realize we're going to have to do when we started traveling was getting used to being flexible again. So let me explain what I mean by that. So when we lived at home in Australia, we had our routine, much like everyone else. We had our routine. We'd go to work, we'd pick up the kids, blah, 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 blah. And because of that, we became quite stubborn with our routines. It's like, this is what we do on this day. The thing is, when you're traveling full time, is that very rarely goes to plan. Very rarely does anything go to plan, actually, but most of the time, things don't go to plan. So you have to teach yourself as an adult to be flexible again. So the kids are fine. They just roll with the punches. You know, if we miss the train, they just sit there and they're happy. In the first couple of months when we missed the train, I get really annoyed about it. Now I'm just like, whatever, just go with the flow. There'll be another one. You really have to, you have to teach yourself that. It's something as an adult you forget how to do. And it's quite hard to get back from being rigid and being routine-based to being just flexible and going with the flow. You know, the amount of times we've rocked up to an Airbnb and it hasn't been comfortable and it's 9 o'clock at night and we've had to go and find another one and we're getting in the grab at 10:30 at night. It's more common than you think. And if you don't learn to just roll with the punches and be flexible, then that stuff will break you. Honestly, it's like the biggest breaker of people that travel like this is, you know, not being able to handle the just fly-by-wire style that comes with traveling full time. So yeah, for the first couple of months, I struggled with it. But as we developed a tolerance to it and we got experience and we realized that it's never that bad, we started getting used to it, and it was perfectly fine in the end. And years later, we literally just roll with the punches. If it rains outside and it ruins the day because we paid for something, it's like, whatever, we'll do something else. It's all good. And yeah, that's something that I definitely didn't expect, is how I didn't realize how rigid we'd gotten and how inflexible we'd gotten in Australia. I'm just living our 9-to-5 life, and that we had to adjust once we got out of Australia and into the world where there's a whole bunch of ifs and buts and variables. So guys, hopefully that gives you a bit of a heads up of what to expect if you plan to travel full time, or you plan to travel for an extended period. It doesn't matter if it's a family or as a couple, you're all going to experience the same thing. So hopefully you found that helpful, guys. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm back on deck. Last week I didn't upload because Pauline's parents have been here and it was a little bit hard logistically, but I thought I'd get this one out because I was thinking about it. And if there's any other topics you'd like me to talk about, make sure to leave it in the comments. Also, leave in the comments the challenges you found traveling yourself. So guys, I'm Jimmy, and I'll catch you all on the horizon.